All right, I'm happy today that we're going to have our minds blown by my good friend and colleague, Petey Lawton, who has already delivered many Rising Tide Foundation presentations on the subject of her expertise, especially which is Africa, past, present, and future, most importantly. Petey is somebody who is, the editor-in-chief of Africa Agenda. It's a wonderful, wonderful website that goes through a lot of deep history and also a lot of current policies regarding a sensitivity to the clash of the two different paradigms that are striving for influence in the coming new system that will emerge over the ashes of the controlled disintegration of the Western transatlantic monstrosity called globalization, which was always designed to blow. So now the fight is on over what the new operating system will be. Petey is somebody who has thought extensively about this, has investigated the clash of these two different paradigms, and has really brought this very effectively into her practical analysis of geopolitical events on a day-to-day basis with a look to the future. So I really appreciate that a lot about Petey. And her website is going to be down in the description box under this video. And we know we have a lot of people in Europe, Petey being one of them, who, though she is South African, she is based in the UK, and it's later on at night, and many other people who are on today are listening. So I don't want to dilly-dally about with long-winded intros. So I'm going to just leave the floor to Petey. And the only thing I'm going to say here is that while, like usual, we're going to go through a really wonderful presentation that'll take us through some very dark manipulations over a century ago in South Africa, as everyone knows, and the rise of certain insidious corporations that still exert a vast influence holding back Africa's true destiny today. Petey had spoken to me the other day about the need to really focus on the future, since really increasingly the past is having less and less dominant influence over Africa as it has over the past century, and a new future has come into store that's creating a new set of potentials that are very exciting and very hopeful. So that's going to be increasingly the focus, I think, today. But that being said, Petey, I'll leave the floor to you.
Thank you very much, Matt. So I'm just going to share my screen. The presentation is called South Africa, the Anglo-American Empire. So the message that I always like to say is a luta continua. That means the struggle continues. We are living in the most unbelievably beautiful times in terms of the changes that are taking place in Africa. So that struggle is continuing, and there are some extremely hard and dangerous situations at the moment, but things are turning, the tide is turning. My story that I'd like to share with you tonight is about the power of corporations. So this is not about capitalism, it isn't about mining, it's about corporations, which are really part of the tentacles of the oligarchy, of the Western elite, the Western mafia, whatever you want to call them, this entity that emanates from the City of London. So we're talking of men and monsters. And in tonight's presentation, we're going to talk about primarily a corporation in South Africa called Anglo-American. It's a sister company of De Beers. De Beers was the company set up by Cecil Rhodes. It's in the name, right? There's a company in South Africa called Anglo-American PLC. And some things just simply are in the name. Matt and many others have dived into Cecil Rhodes's connections to the Milner Group, the City of London elite, the power structures, the circles within circles, and how they control politics wherever they want to. If we go back and look at the start of it all with the Dutch East India Company, which then became the British East India Company, it's a mindset it is a mindset that really hasn't changed that greatly. If you look at the histories and what has happened in countries such as South Africa, Zambia, and many others, this is a mindset where the laissez-faire policies of neoliberalism are completely in control of what happens. So Anglo-American was founded in 1917 by Ernest Oppenheimer. It is, to this day, as a City of London registered company, and initially it was financed by JP Morgan of Wall Street. It's a constituent of the FTSE 100. Now, for a corporation to be in the FTSE 100 for 100 years, and yet the country from which it extracts its wealth, you still find poverty on a level to this extent, tells you something, tells you everything you need to know. This particular picture behind is in South Africa. It could also be a number of African countries in sub-Saharan Africa. Now, I call that a state of capture. When you look at this, and yet you have the mineral wealth of gold, of platinum, of copper, of diamonds on an unbelievable scale for a century, and yet you still have this. I call that state capture. Of course, that is what they threw at former President Jacob Zuma of South Africa, that he had instituted a reign of his very own state capture with a group of Indian brothers called the Guptas. This, of course, was all part of the political assassination of Jacob Zuma because of what he was trying to do. This is Joburg, this is South Africa, the upper echelons today. And I really don't think that this is the future of Africa. I really don't think this is even African. This is a culture that has been imported. It looks like an American culture. I really hope this isn't the future for African countries once they achieve a certain level of prosperity. So how are things done? Well, you have here, the slide has gone slightly haywire, and you can't read there that this is Tito Mboweni, and he was the governor of the Reserve Bank of South Africa from 1999 to 2009. Very important years, very soon after Nelson Mandela came in. He was then also the finance minister under President Ramaphosa from 2018 to 2021. So the control of credit comes from the Reserve Bank. So whoever is the governor of the Reserve Bank, whoever is finance minister, will either agree or disagree to the issuing of credit for programs, for projects that will enhance the quality of living for the nation. So it is an extremely important position for anyone to hold, because they are holding the purse strings of the country. Now, we already know that that this position is very often linked to people in South Africa, to people in the City of London. So when you think what that position is and when certain people have it, this is keeping British liberalism, South Africa's economic model. That's how they do it. Jacob Zuma, in contradiction to that, he said, You cannot have a country where there are people who are super, super rich and people who are super, super hungry. So he really did try to change a situation which so very much needs to be changed. In a sense, he wanted to nationalize the economy and end British liberalism. He wanted South Africa's wealth, its extraordinary amount of mineral wealth, to be used for the benefit of all South Africans. And that is an extremely dangerous thing to want to do. If you look at what was done to President Zuma. Hendrik Verwoerd, he was the leader of the National Party, the Apartheid government. And he wanted to nationalize the mines, believe it or not. So he was an Afrikaner president and he wanted to nationalize the mines. He wanted to get them out of the hands of the private element who really answered to the City of London. He was assassinated very shortly after that, as he gave a speech in Parliament in 1966. Anglo-American is the largest private sector employer in South Africa. There are currently 95,000 employees. It's a City of London registered MNC, as I have already said. The world's largest producer of platinum, also a major producer of diamonds, copper, nickel, and others. Subsidiary companies are major gold producers, Rand Gold, Ashanti Gold, Barrick, etc. There are many others. Many of them are registered in Jersey. It's a British Channel island, a tax haven for offshore banking. Now these companies, these corporations, have been provably involved in so much chaos and carnage in Africa. It is mind-boggling, and yet they somehow get away with it. Glencore was recently charged by an American court for countless cases of bribery in 7 African countries, but they pay a paltry fine, and somehow they keep going, they get away with it, everything gets forgotten. So these mining corporations are not just taking minerals out of the soil and taking them from the countries where they're mined to the north where they're processed, and then very often sold back to those same African countries as a product. So the illicit financial flows from mineral resources, keeping African states the raw materials market for the City of London banking cartel. It isn't just mining, it finances this empire. For instance, on the question of Barrick, a book has been written by a French, in French by Congolese author Patrick Mbeko. It's called Le Canada et le pouvoir Tutsi du Rwanda. And he wrote this book, Mbeko wrote this book after the carnage of what happened in DRC. And he wanted to know what Canadians' gripe was with the Congolese. Why did they want to go and cause so much carnage in their country? And he wrote about the mining companies, all the Canadian mining companies that were involved and provably involved in what had happened and what is still happening. The one thing he didn't connect, of course, is that Canada is a part of the British Commonwealth. So this is happening on a vast scale. It's a network whose power is always underestimated. A little bit here, a little bit there is talked about it, but never the full brunt and the full impact of what is being done. Now, the main thing, this raw materials market, and why that is so incredibly important. For one thing, it's where do you get the profit from? You get the profit from the product. So yes, you can mine bauxite and have produce aluminium, but then you go and turn your aluminium into tubing or to airplanes or to whatever, and that's where your profit is. So that has been the whole idea, this pillaging of natural resources. You know, even in Australia, this is going on. So you have Australia being one of the largest iron ore producers, and yet they don't produce steel. I don't know if maybe that's just me who's surprised to find that out, but Australia does not produce steel. Australia is also part of the Commonwealth. There's a project, a very interesting project that the Australian Citizen Party, Robbie Bowick's party, is trying to promote, and that is called Project Iron Boomerang, to produce steel from Australia's iron ore. And of course, the changes that this kind of thing would bring are monumental. So when we see one day that all African countries are processing their raw materials and producing goods, manufacturing, and actually making something out of those resources, then we will really know that things have changed. So I'd just like to point you towards a really great and enjoyable interview that took place recently with George Galloway. It's on George Galloway's YouTube. And it's an interview with Dr. Fred Membe, who is a Zambian politician. And the title of the interview is "The Mining Companies Which Stripped Zambia Are Back." It's dated the 19th of May, 2023. And he describes, he really describes the impact of what copper mining has done for Zambia, or what it has not done. And now recently, with a change of government, and you suddenly get in a government that has turned from east to west, or from east back to west, who is no longer doing incredible things with the aid of China, and is now turning towards America. So that is a fantastic interview. I think that you would really enjoy that. I'd also like to point to a book called Tiny Roland, The Ugly Face of Neocolonialism in Africa. It's an EIR publication from 1993. Now, Tiny Roland was the go-to man for a corporation called Lonro. Lonro stands for London Rhodesia. So you can pretty much make that out for yourselves. Lonro is a platinum producing company in South Africa, but it is actually a private company, British based. The current president of South Africa is on its board. So a very, very interesting book, which is very finely detailed in what Tiny Roland did, really for far more than just platinum mining for Lonro, but in the destabilization that took place under his tenure. This is not a secret, it is really well known that South Africa under apartheid supported Jonas Savimbi in Angola. He paid them in diamonds, and the whole idea was to get the diamonds into South Africa support Jonas Savimbi and keep Angola destabilized, and make sure that the government that should have been firmly in place, the MPLA, had a very difficult time of it. So you're talking about endless wars, you're talking about destabilization of the entire surrounding region. On the subject of Glencore, there's a fantastic documentary called Stealing Africa. It's called Stealing Africa, Why Poverty? It's a documentary on YouTube, and it was created by Christoph Gulbrandsen in 2012. It goes into Ivan Glassenberg. It goes into the role of Glencore, a copper producer in Zambia, the inordinate amount of profits that companies like this make. And then you look at the standard of living of an average Zambian, and you know that there's something extremely wrong. So really is worth a look. The other one, which I thoroughly recommend, is called The Spider's Web, Britain's Second Empire. Now, The Spider's Web, made by a British filmmaker, and I'm sorry I have omitted his name, but it goes into the offshore banking, the entire system of utterly corrupt accounting that is used by companies such as Glencore in order to reduce the amount of tax they pay to any government. And that goes on all the time. Your average multinational mining minerals in any African country will probably be paying something like 5% tax. I know in Congo that the previous government managed to raise that to 10%, and that was an incredible feat. But these corporations are laws unto themselves, really, is what I would like to say. Now, getting back to Anglo-American in South Africa, to give you a flavor and to bring up some history. Oh, it isn't history, it's going on now. But to bring in a subject which is really highly sensitive, I would like to talk about this woman and a book she's written, 2 books actually. So we're now looking at South Africa back in the 1980s, 1970s, 1980s. In the 70s, there was 620,000 to 712,000 miners. That was 9% of the economically active population working in Anglo-American mines in South Africa. Excuse me. That then rose in the 80s, 700,000 to 800,000, 7.2% of the economically active population. It began to become apparent that miners working in the Anglo-American mines would experience something like a 10-year life expectancy before they came down with chronic illness. So a situation arose whereby Anglo-American, the mining companies of South Africa, would have realized that there was an occupational health emergency. Occupational health from working underground, from working in conditions where you were not given any protective clothing, any masks, any way of reducing the impact of working in an environment that was highly conducive, that is highly conducive to the contraction of silicosis and then silicosis-induced TB. Silicosis is when tiny little particles collect in your lungs. This then leads to further infection. So in the 80s, everyone knew that apartheid was going to end, that it had to end. And it did at the end of the 80s. So at some point in somebody's mind, pulmonary TB becomes AIDS. Now, that is a huge thing to say, but it's what Dr. Nancy Turner Banks, she puts forward the case in her book, AIDS, Opium, Diamonds and Empire, the Deadly Virus of International Greed. And she puts forward her case extremely well. When you look into it, it makes perfect sense. A condition was created that became an umbrella that would protect the mining corporations from having to compensate and own up to the fact that miners were dying in their tens of thousands. Which is one of the reasons that AIDS has always had this tag that it's sexually transmitted, because the miners live in hostels. And it was always said that the miners were very promiscuous, you know, they missed their wives who weren't living in the hostels, and all sorts of antics and all sorts of things used to happen. So the entire narrative of AIDS being a sexually transmitted disease was to cover for this. Today, South Africa has the largest HIV program in the world. 4.7 million people were diagnosed in 2019 figures. Most of the cost of antiretroviral treatment comes from the public purse. That means government paid for. The South African government is the largest procurer of antiretroviral drugs in the world. In 2014, the South African government paid $2.2 billion on antiretrovirals. Since then, they have found cheaper sources. So what am I saying? And am I saying it coherently? I'm saying that the corporations who needed an excuse for why the miners were dying contacted pharmaceutical corporations and said, we need a cover story. That's really a crazy thing to say. So her following book, The Slow Death of the AIDS Cancer Paradigm, and I'm afraid I won't even try and read those words. Is it sloppy science? Is HIV/AIDS sloppy science or the art of deception? A quote from her book, and the light shineth in darkness, and the darkness comprehended it not. So where are we going with science? Medical science, very pertinent today because of the pandemic and the treatment used. There's only one source on the internet anymore, one credible source, and that is the Perth Group. That's where you can access it. Nancy Turner Banks had a website, but that has gone down. So what actually happened? You know, what was the story behind all that? Did somebody go to the pharmaceutical company and say, we need the cover story and we'll pay you because in 10 years' time, in 20 years' time, the South African government is still going to be spending billions on providing its population with HIV antiretroviral drugs. So what they did to create this entire story of an HIV/AIDS narrative is they created an industry. And that industry provides tens of thousands of jobs in Southern Africa. People working in community projects, people teaching, people administering ARVs, the testing that takes place. On that note of testing, I would like to just bring in that the standard HIV test used in South Africa is banned in Germany. They won't use it in Germany. Germany has a very high standard of medical care. In Nancy Turner Banks's books, she goes into depth as to why that testing cannot possibly be proving anything. Now, a strange thing has happened. Antiretrovirals, AIDS drugs, they've now become the most widespread and cheapest drug available in South Africa. People are smoking it. It's called Niobe or Wunga, and it's a mix of brown heroin and a bit of weed, a bit of something else. But the key ingredient is ARV, antiretroviral drugs, HIV drugs. This stuff drives people completely insane. It makes them extremely violent, and it is the mother of all addictions. There's a crime problem in South Africa, a very, very serious crime problem, slightly better than it was. It really peaked a few years ago. And a lot of it is to do with desperation. A lot of it is to do with the spread of drugs. There's a massive drug problem in South Africa. Heroin is one of them. It has been in Durban a long time. Durban's a port city. And then there's been talk of Cabo Delgado in Mozambique being a drug port. I don't know the veracity of that, but it would certainly explain the terrorism. It would certainly explain why it has been so difficult to get this region free of radicals and terrorists. So going back to 2010, when there was what is called the Durban Declaration, when the South African government finally capitulated and officially agreed with the AIDS, HIV/AIDS diagnosis. And before then, this was under the presidency of Thabo Mbeki. Before then, Thabo Mbeki had always said that, you know, South Africa suffers from many things. It suffers from poor medical facilities, from extreme malnutrition, from a number of conditions that should all be treated separately. And then along came the signing of the Durban Declaration. And all of a sudden, no matter what somebody may have or have had or may not have had, their illness could be diagnosed as HIV. It became an umbrella for a multitude of diseases, of conditions, including the miners with their silicosis-induced TB. So very, very handy. What a handy thing to have. It exonerates you, doesn't it? If you can just say, oh, they are HIV positive. Now, there was a minister in government, and I was unable to find her name, but I remember her speaking about the need for people to broaden their diet to try and mitigate the effects of malnutrition. And she was talking about having some beetroot or having some garlic, that these are extremely nutritious foods, and that if you add them to your diet, you will be healthier. And the backlash, the media backlash on this poor minister was unbelievable. And to this day, she is remembered for them taking the piss out of her for talking about beetroot and garlic as being a cure for AIDS. And that's not what she was saying. She was saying this is malnutrition. This is because people who are on an extremely low income live on maize meal. They live on maize meal, putupap, ground up maize meal, polenta they call it in Italy. And if you just rely on that because it's a carbohydrate and something about maize meal, you don't need much and you feel full, then you will be malnourished. You will not be getting enough of the essential nutrients and vitamins. So she was quite correct to say that. But she lost her position, she lost her job, and the media took the mickey out of her. A lot of things like that happened. I'd like to bring in on this point that in the 1980s, bearing in mind AIDS appeared in 1981, there was a condition called ME or CFS, chronic fatigue syndrome. And I remember people in those days, I remember one person in particular, I use the terms white and black, a white woman was diagnosed with ME. At the same time, I remember a black woman having a very similar symptoms, weight loss, fatigue, no energy, inability to do anything. I remember her getting a diagnosis of AIDS. Very interesting. Remember, this was called, this outbreak of ME was called yuppie flu in Britain at the time. So really we need to question whatever this thing was, whatever this thing is. There's also a question, there was always a theory. There's a bioweapons lab in South Africa called Project Coast, run by somebody affectionately known as Dr. Death, called Vota Basson. And this was a bioweapons lab, officially recognized, not a secret. And there was talk of a insect-borne virus. So was there something going on at this time? Was something being transmitted? So just another thought to put into that. So on the subject of South Africa and the mining giants, today South Africa is getting better, but it has huge problems. it has huge problems in that things don't function as they should and as they could. South Africa should really be the absolute powerhouse of Southern Africa. It's the gateway to Southern and Central Africa. It should be a manufacturing powerhouse. It should be one of the most prosperous countries in the world, and it's struggling. So apartheid has ended, and we are looking at a situation where the water runs out, the post office doesn't work, the courts aren't working properly, the medical system in some regions is falling apart, the lack of drugs and equipment. The actual structure is in a bad state. Now, this is another sensitive subject because a program was brought in through affirmative action at the end of apartheid. It's called Black Economic Empowerment, BEE. And Black Economic Empowerment is like racism in reverse. So it's if you have a company, you have to have a quota. You have to fulfill your diversity quota. You have to have,
which brings all of society down. And for those members of the race that are sons that are genuinely capable.
Yeah. Okay. So you have a system in place that is stopping people who should be in important positions from getting there. And I'm not talking black or white. And the people who understand about the system know that it isn't a question of black or white. This is a question of stopping people who have exceptional ability from getting into the positions a country needs to run effectively. So that quota system, you will have to have a percentage of people from different backgrounds. You'll have to have a percentage of people of different colors, you know, coffee brown, black, white, a little bit of white. You have to have an array of conditionalities that you have to fulfill. So if you have people who are disabled, you have to have a percentage of them. It's an insane way for any country to operate, and it is having negative effects. Now, I say that we take this one step further, because the oligarchy, remember the oligarchy wants South Africa's minerals. They don't want South Africa to be a prosperous country. They don't want it to be sovereign in any way at all. And prosperity for all would be a form of this breakthrough sovereignty if South Africa suddenly became the manufacturing hub of sub-Saharan Africa, as it should be. The oligarchy don't want that. These are Malthusians. So I am suggesting that the system that they used to keep apartheid in place, which is so well written about, so ably written about in this book, The Psychology of Apartheid by Peter Lamley, a Zambian guy. And he was a psychologist. He couldn't understand, I'm sure he's still alive, he couldn't understand how it could be that apartheid, the structure of apartheid in all its insanity and ugliness and brutality, could be kept in such a permanent and strong position over an entire country. And he documents it. He documents how it was that he calls it the Afrikaner government, but we know it wasn't that. We know it wasn't that. We know that South Africa under apartheid was really, it was a, oh, what is the word? A manipulation by the City of London. Racial divide was started a very, very long time ago by the British in South Africa. And it progressed. It started a century or so ago. So in that book, The Psychology of Apartheid, Peter Lamley writes about how every institution, every university, every municipality, every position of power was occupied by a person of a certain ideology and a certain mindset. And that anyone who thought different to that ideology of apartheid never got that position. So I think that the same system is running the institutions today. Now, it's very interesting, isn't it, that Black economic empowerment was created by Anglo-American. They created Patrice Motsepe, the first Black mining giant. He is now a billionaire. He was created by the sister organization of Anglo-American to be the black face of corporate mining in South Africa. They created B. So Patrice Motsepe, it was Anglo-Val that gifted Patrice Motsepe entry into the world of corporate mining. He then formed Rainbow Minerals. Rainbow Minerals then formed AREP, African Rainbow Energy and Power, completely into renewables and nothing but renewables. AREP was launched by Patrice Motsepe and ABSA. ABSA is a major bank in South Africa. ABSA stands for Amalgamated Banks of South Africa. Barclays Bank of the UK owns 54% of ABSA. That should tell you a lot. AREP is in partnership with BEV. BEV is Breakthrough Energy Ventures. BEV was created by Bill Gates, Jeff Bezos, Jack Ma, Richard Branson, and somewhere I've also got it written that it's George Soros. Now this solar and wind, the renewables, it's a speculative money laundering bubble of self-enrichment for this elite from the public purse. That's all it is. You cannot run a national grid on solar or wind, and they know that. Eskom is South Africa's power utility. It has been obliged to subsidize renewables in South Africa. I won't say anything. So we come now to history that was taken. This man here is Robert Sobukwe, and he's surrounded here by the founding members of the Pan-African Congress, known as PAC. Now, the ANC have been the liberation movement of South Africa, and I think well of them. I know they need to clean house, but they have some of the most excellent politicians in government at present, thinking of people like Naledi Pandor, Minister Gwede Mantashe. But this organization never had its rightful place in the history of South Africa. And in fact, so much of what this man wrote and spoke has been removed, has been disappeared. He died way before his time. So that was Robert Sobukwe. And the reason that the establishment went to such great lengths to eradicate his memory, I mean, they really haven't succeeded, but to try as hard as they could to eradicate the memory of him, was because he was different. He said, the Africans take the view that there is only one race to which we all belong, and that is the human race. In our vocabulary, therefore, the word race, as applied to man, has no plural form. You see, he believed in humanity. He said, what is the point in only fighting the black cause? We are fighting for people. We are fighting for humanity. They put him in a prison on Robben Island. He was on Robben Island for years. He didn't die there. He was sent home because he died of lung cancer. But they put him in his own quarters, separate from everyone else on Robben Island. I mean, that should tell you a lot. This guy was in complete isolation. They did not want him talking to anybody. He was intensely remarkable. A new book has been written, 2018, by this man. So Tami Kaplaki has relatively recently released this book, and it is stunning. I'm reading it now. Absolutely fantastic. He's gone to where Sobukwe grew up in Graaff-Reinet. He's spoken to people who remember him, who knew him. He is absolutely delving into the soul of this man and doing a fantastic job. At this point, I'd just like to quickly read you something because it's so beautiful. So this particular quote is from Benjamin Pogren's book on Sobukwe. It's called How Can Man Die Better? The Life of Robert Sobukwe. So he gave this speech at Fort Hare in October of 1949. A word to those who are remaining behind. You have seen by now what education means to us, the identification of ourselves with the masses. Education to us means service to Africa. You have a mission. We all have a mission. A nation to build we have. A God to glorify, a contribution clear to make towards the blessing of mankind. We must be the embodiment of our people's aspirations. And all we are required to do is to show the light, and the masses will find the way. Watch our movements keenly, and if you see any sign of broad-mindedness or reasonableness in us, or if you hear us talk of practical experience as a modifier of man's views, denounce us as traitors to Africa. We will watch you too. We have been reminded time and again that fellows who, while at college, were radicals, as soon as they got outside, became the spineless stooges and screeching megaphones of white heronfolkism, or else became disgruntled and disillusioned objects of pity. My contention is, those fellows never were radicals. They were anti-white. And as Marcus Garvey says, you cannot grow beyond your thoughts. If your thoughts are those of a slave, you will remain a slave. If your thoughts go skin deep, your mental development will remain skin deep. Moreover, a doctrine of hate can never take people anywhere. It is too exacting. It warps the mind. That is why we preach the doctrine of love. Love for Africa. We can never do enough for Africa, nor can we love her enough. The more we do for her, the more we wish to do. And I'm sure that I am speaking for the whole of young Africa when I say that we are prepared to work with any man who is fighting for the liberation of Africa within our lifetime. To the completers, among whom I number myself, my exaltation is, remember Africa. He was intensely moving, an intensely brilliant man. So South Africa, this country that produces so many tons of raw materials, the platinum, the gold, the copper, the diamonds, just to name a few. This country that has the infrastructure, that has everything needed to be the manufacturing hub, to be the most economically powerful country in Africa, for everyone to have a decent standard of living, to be manufacturing everything for the countries in sub-Saharan Africa. But what do you need? What do you need to do all that? You need energy. So we come to Eskom, South Africa's power utility, and how the oligarchy have targeted this institution, have tried to utterly destroy it. So here's Mr. Slick. This man is called Andre de Ruyter, and thankfully he is no longer the head of Eskom. He's gone back to the UK with a tail between his legs. He tried to slip in a new Green Deal for South Africa. He tried to slip in the green economy. And if it weren't for this man, Minister of Mineral Resources, Gwedi Mantashe, he might well have succeeded. This minister is an absolute national hero. He has been incredible, a stalwart in support of coal. South Africa has tons and tons and tons of coal. And this man, almost on his own, has been fighting the cause for South Africa's right to burn coal, to produce energy, to give people jobs, to run a national grid, to have a powerhouse, an economic powerhouse. Just an incredible man. He has supported nuclear. He's been one of the very few people high up in South Africa who have supported South Africa's treasure, Koeberg. And it's a fantastic nuclear energy industry. Groundbreaking stuff. They developed a small modular reactor. What South Africa has done nuclear-wise has just been astonishing. The world leaders in the industry, they really are. So this man has saved the day. He has saved South Africa from the fate it would experience were it to have gone completely green.
P, what was the name of the Mr. Slick? What was his real name?
Andre de Ruyter.
Thank you.
That's just written there, Andre de Ruyter.
Okay.
Okay, so a part of the whole thing that happened, because this destruction of Eskom has been going on for a few years. You can read an article I wrote. It's called The Hatchet Team for Taking Eskom Down. It's on my website, African Agenda. Just type that in, it'll come up. So in 2018, President Ramaphosa, and I must just insert here that he has changed. Leopards change their spots, they really do. But in 2018, President Ramaphosa, newly appointed after President Zuma, appointed a sustainability task team to Eskom, South Africa's power utility that operates the national grid. So this sustainability task team, of the 8 team members who were all connected to the green agenda and or linked to Anglo or Anglo-American subsidiaries. So those 8 people were all connected to Anglo-American, all of them. Can you believe Mick Davis, Chief Treasurer of the UK Conservative Party and CEO of Xstrata, one-time CEO of Xstrata, high up in Glencore, high up in BHP Billington, the big mining giants. This guy was appointed as the Eskom Sustainability Task Team. Although you can't make it up, you really can't. Next on the amazing list, Anton Eberhard, South African, incredibly anti-nuclear, extremely pro-renewables. He has been promoting energy auctions. You know, sell off your energy to the highest bidder. This crazy stuff that energy can just float on the stock market. That it's not a basic of life. You know. Grove Stein, another member of the Sustainability Task Team, economic advisor to government at one time. He was one of the reasons that South Africa never took up the second nuclear power plant. Had they done so, they would have had none of the problems, none of the blackouts that they're having now. Strongly anti-nuclear. And Grove Stein has always called for wind to be subsidized by government. Well, it's been subsidized by Eskom at the taxpayer's expense. Brian Dames, he resigned very soon after his appointment, came straight from Patrice Motsepe's Rainbow Minerals and the Green Economy Working Group for the Decarbonization of BRICS members. Wow, fantastic. Frans Baleni from the National Union of Mine Workers, and one of the people who called for former President Jacob Zuma's new mining charter to be scrapped. Zuma's new mining charter, by the way, was another one of the key reasons they had to destroy him. They had to rip him out because it was calling for processing of all South Africa's natural resources. So processing of everything before being exported. To this day, you still cannot cut a diamond in South Africa. It has to go to Amsterdam or Tel Aviv. Can you believe that? Okay. So now, we've heard all the vile stuff. And I want to come to what is taking place in the present. And it is intensely wonderful. Look at this picture. This is Minister Naledi Pandor. She is amazing. Utterly incredible woman. South Africa's foreign minister. She's ANC. But wow. South Africans really be proud of this woman. She is brokered. She has managed to stall so many operations that the London oligarchy have thrown at South Africa. And here she is in a very recent photo, shaking hands, South Africa and Russia. This is just fantastic. There are a number of wonderful things happening across the continent. This is Burkina Faso. Many African countries recently made a trip, were invited to Russia. And Burkina Faso was one of them. So Russia is having a tremendously positive effect on the countries that want to work with it. We know that tremendous pressure has been put on all African governments, particularly South Africa, to go along with the Russian sanctions. And you know, the tide is turning. So many African countries are just turning around and saying, to hell with you, you know, to hell with being told what to do. We're not going to be told what to do and when to do it anymore. We want to deal with Russia because they have great deals on offer. We can do great things together with them. So this is what's happening. This is a representative, or I'm not sure this is Mali. So, you know, a number of countries went. I wrote an article on it. It's on my website. Tremendously positive effect. I really do say that the African dream is becoming reality through the BRICS, through this multipolar world, through the Belt and Road Initiative. And I just want to read the good news list. So just recently, okay, just like in the last fortnight, Namibia, President in Namibia has signed into law that all minerals mined in Namibia have to go through processing. So I hope that my talk today will explain to you the importance of that. That's monumental news, really is monumental news. Messina Mercado, one of the projects in South Africa that Zuma's new mining charter was going to address, and that is would have been one of the largest special economic zones in Southern Africa, up in Limpopo province, to process all the minerals coming down from the DRC. That may finally resurrect itself and actually turn into something, because that is a very, very interesting project. Very recently, Africa has sent a peace mission for dialogue between Ukraine and Russia. I mean, really, this is a first, you know, African leaders having this kind of role in the world. So we had Senegalese President Macky Sall and Ramaphosa of South Africa. I believe they went to Ukraine, and they have been to Russia. So this is a change. This is a dramatic change. Other fantastic news. Kenya revives African push to ditch dollar for Pan-African payments and settlement system. So the African Union has already got a payment system. I didn't know about it, but they want to, Ruto, Kenya's president, is pushing for this to be fast-tracked. Okay, so it's Pan-African Payments and Settlement Systems, PAPS. Incredibly important for this to happen, especially for the African Free Trade Agreement. They need a payment system that is not using the dollar, but that is using regional currencies. He said on this, Ruto said on this, furthermore, by promoting the use of local currencies and bypassing the need for foreign exchange conversions, PAPS, PAPSS can enhance economic sovereignty and strengthen Africa's position in global trade. Therefore, President Ruto was insistent that instead of turning to a dollar alternative like the Chinese yuan, African countries would be better off using a mechanism for settling payment in local currencies like the Pan-African Payments and Settlement System to avoid unnecessary problems. Fantastic, I love it. Another thing, carbon currency expansion. Top discussions at BRICS FM Summit in Cape Town, South Africa. Big one to be held in August. So BRICS, how many countries are going to join BRICS? Talk of Burundi joining very soon. fantastic news from Burundi as well. Russia-Burundi finalized agreement on peaceful nuclear energy. So that geographically small country of Burundi is going to adopt nuclear technology. Absolutely fantastic news. The Atlantic NATO bloc, are building exclusive circles to suppress and contain the development of China and other developing countries. Essentially, they do not want to allow the developing countries to achieve development or economic prosperity. This is in sharp contrast to what the BRICS is doing to be self-strengthening. And China's vice foreign minister said that, and it is exactly true. Sergei Lavrov, BRICS symbolized the evolution of the multipolar world. So on that note, we're coming to the end of my presentation. I just want to bring this up. This man here is Felix Tshisekedi, and he's the president of the Democratic Republic of Congo. And I just think he's fantastic. So I've written an article, it's called Bravo, Monsieur le Président de RDC, bravo, because he has done something almost quite inconceivable. He's been to China. It was his first trip to China. And he gave a talk for CGTN while he was there. And what he said blew my mind. In a nutshell, he said that he sees what the government of China have done in the alleviation of poverty. And he wants to emulate them and do the same for his country. That is such amazing news. It is just incredible. Of the amazing things he said in that interview, which you can see on my website. Today is high time we process the minerals extracted here within the DRC. This will add value and most importantly create wealth and jobs in the DRC. China has also agreed to support us in all what we call the industrialization of the DRC. Of course, industrialization goes hand in hand with infrastructure and energy. These are two major challenges we want to tackle in the next decade, and China is ready to support us. Our cooperation and partnership can only be a win-win in the future. He said, I know that today we have about 50 years of partnership and friendship, meaning Congo and China. There are notable parallels between the histories of our two countries. Both China and DRC have been scourged by poverty and famine. However, China has leveraged its strengths and resources to escape these predicaments, and that is why it serves as an inspiring model for us. I say bravo to China achieving its modernization, because one must not forget that in the 60s, China and the Democratic Republic of Congo were more or less on an equal economic footing. The leap that China has made is impressive, and this model is really a model that I would like to emulate and replicate in my country. I am so unbelievably thrilled to hear him say that. He is saying what China has done, it is perfectly achievable to do in Congo. And then to top it all on this extraordinary interview, the interviewer asked him, he said, on this alleviation of poverty and the changes that he wants to make for Congo, and the negative, because Tshisekedi explained that Congo has such a negative image in the world. Much of Africa, most of Africa has this horrendous negative image, like the Sudan playing out on our television screens at the moment. And the interviewer, the CGTN interviewer, asked Tshisekedi how long he thought it would take to change the image of Congo for the world. And what he was saying was, how long do you think we will be able to see meaningful changes for Congolese people? And Tshisekedi, an incredibly dignified man, and he very calmly said, oh, in less than a dozen years. So, ah, wow, do I love that man. Just incredible. I anticipate this happening within less than a dozen years. The other amazing thing is, and this is not confirmed, but it is highly likely that Grand Inga will go ahead under Chinese construction. That is not confirmed. That is not confirmed. But it's looking highly likely with the success of Tshisekedi's recent visit to China. Obviously got on fantastically well there, that the Chinese, who had the original deal for the Grand Inga project, this will mean 45,000 megawatts. It's enough. Grand Inga is enough to power most of the continent from hydro. So monumental news. Now, I always have to say it because it's on the map behind me, if my camera were on. And this is the African Integrated High-Speed Railway Network. This has to be done. This has to be done for changes to happen as quickly as they need to happen for African economies to industrialize. Of course, for this network, you need energy, you need electricity, because these are high-speed electric trains. Tremendous progress being made in Tanzania with this, by the way, and Ethiopia. I believe in Senegal as well, and some other regions, Egypt certainly. But so much more needs to be done, and it needs to happen tomorrow, not by 2063. One last thing, energy solutions for Africa. As we were talking with Minister Mantashe, fighting for South Africa's right to use its coal reserves, it is so important for people to know that the energy solutions, these green energy solutions being imposed on Africa, they may work in Europe. They are not going to work on this continent, because Europeans, Westerners, have no idea how huge countries in Africa are. So this map, a fantastic map here, shows you that's the United States, China, France, Spain, Germany, Eastern Europe, Italy. Look at them, the blooming continent dwarfs the lot. So energy solutions for Africa, not for Europe. These green energy solutions are not the answer. They really are not. Let African people choose their own energy solutions. They know what they need. They have the right ideas. So with that, I'd like to thank you all very much indeed for listening to me. I hope I've been coherent, and I hope I have explained to you what these monolithic corporations are, what they're capable of, how much power they have, and how much they are connected to the City of London. So with that, I will conclude. Thank you very much indeed.
What a masterpiece. Thank you very much for sharing this. Wow, this is really great.
Yes,
And I encourage people to go back to this again and again. Also, if it's possible, PD, would you be able to send me a list of all of the resources you would like to have put in the description box of this video when we make this available next week?
Yes, definitely, Matt. That would be great.
Thank
Yeah.
you so much. Well, there's a couple of people who got their names in early. Larry, I saw early on the board, who is aching to throw a thought and a question in. So Larry, if you're still there, go for it. Larry, if you're speaking, you are on mute. Okay, so Larry must have to fix something there. So Jerry, you have a question about Rwanda?
yes. Thank you very much, PD. That was very, very educational. I learned so much today. But I wanted to ask you a question about Rwanda. I hope you don't mind getting off topic a little, but in the press here, I'm reading this story that Britain wants to send their migrants to Rwanda, and it just sounds so disrespectful. It's like you're excuse me, you're treating these people like a piece of furniture, you know. Or Britain saying, "Oh, we have too much furniture here, so we'll send our, excess furniture to Rwanda." And Rwanda's saying, "Oh yeah, we need furniture, but we can't afford to buy new ones, so we'll get a deal on this used furniture from Britain." But it just makes me. But the problem is, because our media here is so controlled, we just get few little tidbits of it. And my question was, I wanted to know if you'd been following this story, and if you have, could you educate us a little bit on what it's really all about? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jerry. Yes, I have been following it because it's on. We have a relatively new news channel with Nigel Farage, and I do watch that. It's called GB News. It, in my opinion, did used to be better than it is now. But they follow the story because immigration is. It is a huge problem, both here in the UK and in Ireland, in terms of how many people. Remember the size of the UK, and remember that most of the UK you cannot build on. So you get building permits for a very small percentage of the land area. Most of Scotland is owned by a handful of families from Westminster. So just bear in mind that geographically there's a certain situation in this plantation of ours. So immigration is a problem. A very high number of people coming in over the channel, because they come on these little rubber dinghies over the channel, the people with no visas, are Albanians. So there's a very high percentage of people from Albania. Now, Albania is not a country at war, and it's also in the European Union. They don't like to tell you that. There's another issue, and I think the whole question of immigration is hideous when you look at how many people have died and are dying continuously. There was a horrific capsizing. Hundreds of people died in the Mediterranean, this conduit through Libya. So that situation is being facilitated by the oligarchy, the mafia. They're facilitating it by allowing the NGOs to go out there and pick them up. And that sounds utterly heartless. But the smugglers, they are in cahoots with the smugglers. Remember, this is all part of the network. So that entire immigration issue is a tragedy of our times. However, there is another kind of immigration issue which involves who is really coming into this country. And as I say, many of them are people who are not fleeing war. They're coming from a neighboring country that's in the EU. All that aside, I personally don't believe any of that has any bearing on sending asylum seekers to Rwanda. I don't think that whole thing has got anything whatsoever to do with asylum seekers. I think it's a way and a means for London to be getting money to the Kagame regime, because Rwanda is running out of money, from what I hear. Tshisekedi, who I talked about in one of the last slides, the president of Congo, has sealed the borders of Congo. Prior to that, Rwanda has been looting. Remember London, in a previous talk I explained the connection between Paul Kagame, the president of Rwanda, and his connections to Tony Blair, to the City of London, how Rwanda has been used to destabilize the entire Great Lakes and to exploit the minerals of Eastern Congo, phenomenally wealthy in mineral resources, these past 20 years. Now, Tshisekedi has come in and he sealed the borders. He put those eastern provinces on under martial law to seal the borders and to stop the black market trade in Congo's minerals. So these are all highly lucrative stuff, coltan for your mobile phones, lithium, gold, diamonds, you name it, Congo's got it. And Tshisekedi has started a gold refinery in South Kivu. That is very recent and that is monumental, because prior to that, all the gold was being refined in Rwanda. Rwanda doesn't have any gold. So I think that that is just the City of London's way of propping up a ailing dictator, and it has absolutely nothing to do with the refugee situation at all. No. Okay.
Next up, Orinder has a question.
Hi, Ms. Ludden. Thanks for your very informative talk. You mentioned that how the big pharma powers falsified what was a hunger and malnutrition issue and suppressed the need for good nutrition and make it seem like it was a virus. Now, I've heard that the Gates Foundation has been very active in Africa, claiming that they are there to help solve the hunger and malnutrition problem. I think some leaders have recently spoken and said that they don't want, they don't want the Gates Foundation because the outcomes have actually been far worse. But I don't know how widespread that is in the African leadership, and because it is still being built as a continent of Africa. There's still lots of division, lots of manipulation from London. What is your view on how Gates is now being viewed by the leadership and also by the common people of Africa?
I think what he brings, unfortunately, Gates, and I'm thinking of the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, what he brings is employment. That's the hideous thing. So just on that subject of HIV/AIDS, the number of jobs that are within that, what I call the AIDS industry, whether it's community care workers, teachers, whatever, people who go out and dish out the ARVs, there are hundreds of thousands of jobs involved in that. And many of those will be funded by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. So this is an incredibly insidious way of ensuring that nobody ever questions a status quo, because they will lose their job. And jobs are precious, in countries where unemployment is extremely high. I know Zimbabwe probably will have nothing whatsoever to do with the man. Zimbabwe is holding out strong in many ways. They won't have any GMOs. They're banned in Zimbabwe. I'm pretty sure Gates is probably persona non grata there. Elsewhere, I know Burkina Faso has a very strong stance. You'll find many of the countries like, I can imagine Mali would probably have nothing to do with them, but Nigeria would. I know he gave a talk in Nigeria, how well he's received. Well, he always comes bearing offerings of cash, doesn't he? And that is probably the ultimate problem. Never underestimate people's, whether it's a common man or whether it's people in government. They probably know as well as you and I do. This is one evil man.
Yeah, this is the philanthropic approach started by the Rockefellers, which is being continued by this guy. You You pretend to be doing good and you actually are.
Well, it's like in South Africa, one of the mining magnates pays for, I can't remember the percentage, but it's a huge percentage of South African school children on a low income, families on a low income, pays for their school meal. That's the blackmail. It's blackmail. It's not philanthropy. It's blackmail.
Thank you.
Larry appears to have figured out how to get the audio working or the mic working. Larry, are you there?
Yep.
Okay.
Oh, sorry about that. Hi, I wanted to ask you, you mentioned very early on, in the very beginning of your presentation, I think, slight history of South Africa. So my minimal knowledge is South Africa, the first is the Dutch East India Company, arrives around 1652. What is the relationship between the Dutch and the British East India Company, and how does the British crowd become the dominant factor, the dominant controller?
So it was a Dutch colony. The Cape of Good Hope was a Dutch colony.
Right.
Jan van Riebeeck and all that. Now I cannot think of that missing link, Larry, as to how it became the Dutch East India Company became the British East India Company, and then control of the Horn went to Britain. I just cannot think of what that link is. I'm so sorry,
Okay.
but it's one and the same. And also, I think if we also go back to the Dutch connection. So this is an Anglo-Dutch empire, the Dutch connection of the bankers, the Glorious Revolution, William and Mary. I think if we go back to that, it all starts to make sense. But the incident, the event, and historical event that had that created the answer to your question, I cannot think of. I'm sorry.
My recollection, I mean, Matt may know a lot more. I think in the British East India Company is created in 1603 as a major British corporation. So I'm thinking the history of the British East India Company precedes the Dutch, but again, I'm not 100% clear. Do you know anything about that, Matt?
I think probably it's not something I've looked at too much, but I think the British Royal Africa Company probably would play a big role in the whole equation, since that's what John Locke was a director of way back when. But I don't know.
Okay. I guess I stumped you guys.
Yeah, that's a good question.
Yeah.
We should be that's the challenge. All right, so it's a race to get the answer to that question.
Okay. You're gonna have to hit the books, Matt.
Good, healthy scavenger hunt. All right, so whoever gets the answer gets to give a class. All right, so Kelly. Actually, before you ask the question, PDD, what about Belgium and the Belgian, Leopold directed operations, raping Belgium, and how that interfaces with these De Beers and other conglomerates like Anglo-American. Does that play an enduring role today, or is that something that was sort of iced out by the new Anglo-American, dominated corporations?
No, not at all. And you're going to stump me again because I need a name. Maurice Tempelsman. So you have the connection between Anglo-American and economic advisor to Mobutu and DRC. So if you remember that Leopold was a cousin of Queen Victoria, so that whole royal network, that whole European oligarchy basically were related, weren't they? All of the royals were related, and Leopold was a cousin of Victoria, a close cousin. Now there were two Leopolds, so we're going for the first one, who regarded Congo as his own fiefdom. That connects to the oligarchy in terms of that relationship with Queen Victoria, and then you've got the Anglo-American influence today in terms of the mining companies. Barrick, I believe, is Canadian based, but then we must think Commonwealth, and how those mining companies influence governments and people in power in Congo. By the way, I have had it said to me that Congo has a budget of it was under 10. It was an incredibly small figure. You think this is the second largest country in Africa. East to west is like London to Moscow. It has a budget of, I wish I could remember, 8 billion. Unbelievably small. You think of the mineral wealth that's extracted from that country. Tesla, Apple, everything, you name it. And they have such a small budget to operate such a vast country. But the connection is in Nancy's book, Maurice Templesman, and then you've got other names coming in. So these people will be advisors of some description. So that would be relevant to today.
Yeah, that's interesting. So I know that I'm doing some work right now on the origins of the Five Eyes and U.S. military intelligence, and I was telling you when we were chatting the other day about the Rhodesian the British mercenary deployed to South Africa, Claude Dancy. How Claude Dancy became the head of U.S. military intelligence, but he was a devout disciple of Cecil Rhodes, and worked in both Boer Wars. But he integrated, or he worked with William Rockefeller and the Eastern Establishment sort of Pilgrim Society crowd in 1908, 1909 through the Belgian this massive Belgian conglomerate, and Leopold was brokering these deals. So there's a huge story there. Yeah, it's good that you put forth all these leads. That's great.
Oh, interesting.
And by the way, just as a little punchline, that guy I just mentioned, Claude Dancy, became deputy director of MI5, who founds U.S. military intelligence and the NSA.
You can't make it up, surely.
That's wild, eh? It's yeah, Claude Dancy. That's right, Scott. Yeah, another thought that just entered my mind too is Peter Monk, right? He was a co-founding member of the 1001 Nature Trust founded by Prince Bernhard of the Netherlands. So you have that angle too, right? The head of Barrick Gold.
Okay.
So we have Kelly on education. Are you still there, Kelly?
Hi, IPD. Thanks for your presentation. It's pretty informative. I guess I'm getting the impression South Africa and Africa itself is starting to, at least trying to come of age. They're getting a lift from the Belt and Road Initiative, like investment and railroads probably, and things like that. They're going to need, they're going to need, like in the future, they're going to need the children, the African children, people there. They're going to need education for all this future growth that possibly could be coming. Is there any initiative, like with the educational institutions or anything like that in Africa?
I have a great story for you. So this happened recently, right? Talking of education. So a friend's son came to visit, and this young chap, he's 18, from Mozambique. So born and grown up in Mozambique. He came on his own without his dad, and he stayed with us. And he was sitting on the sofa, and there was something on the television about Henry VIII. And all of a sudden, he starts talking about Henry VIII and all of his 6 wives, or whatever it was, and the kings and queens of England. And I looked at him and I said, but you've been to school in Mozambique. What are you learning about Henry VIII and all his blooming adulterous lifestyle for? That's what I learned about when I was at school in South Africa. Why are you learning about that now at school in Mozambique? And he said, well, that's what we're taught. So I said, no, you're joking. I said, I was taught that. What is it now? I mean, crikey, how long? 30 years ago. And he said, oh, it's the Cambridge system. We're on the Cambridge system. And I said to him, did you learn about the history of Mozambique, of the Monomatopan Empire, these incredible ruins of citadels stretching all the way from the east coast to the west coast, to the ruins of Great Zimbabwe, and the kings and queens of Luango, and all the amazing kingdoms of Africa. And he looked at me and he said, but we never made anything out of stone. Isn't that horrific? That's your invisible empire for you. Here is a child who is Mozambican, thinks that his people didn't build anything out of stone, but he knows all about Henry VIII and his 6 wives. Same as what I was taught 30 years ago in South Africa, because I knew nothing. I was taught nothing about African history. So there's a current education problem for you.
Yeah.
The Pan-African revival that's currently underway having an influence on institutions, like educational institutions currently, refocusing on sort of the more healthy, true history of pre-colonial Africa and what have you?
No, I think from what I've heard, the things which are concentrated on are hugely negative. So South Africa, they'll be taught to hate white people, South African apartheid, other history which is being taught is slavery. And anyone wants to talk to me about African history and they mention slavery, I want to run 1,000,000 miles or chuck something in the air out of fury, because there's so much beautiful history on that continent. And then you concentrate on this thing called slavery, which enforces a victim mindset. And that's why they do it. That's why they're always shoving slavery down people's necks. Slavery, slavery, slavery. You were the victim of slavery. No, the Mansa Musa was the richest man who has ever lived in the history of time. The king of that region of Mali. The monumental amount of beautiful history that is there to be taught, which inspires people and gives them a sense of themselves. The identity, your identity as a person, your history, where you come from, so important. So I don't know if that answers your question. Yeah.
It seems similar to the sort of problem, the sort of cultural warfare launched against the American population too, that focuses on a critique of the U.S. acting historically in the worst of ways, but completely obliterates any telling of any positive sense of history. So you have what appears to be a liberating approach to recognizing the evils of the past and tearing down statues of KKK, Confederates and stuff. But then at the same time, you find there's nothing positive behind it. So it comes down to just wanting to tear down just tear down all establishment institutions because it's all equally treated as bad with the 1619 project, and not replace it with anything, or bring back the true USA that was anti-imperial, anti-racist. So it seems like what you're saying has sort of it's been tweaked and applied for an
tweaked.
African youth population too.
Yeah, but then, you know, I don't know what's being taught in schools in Mali. Maybe something totally amazing. I mean, do they know? I'm sure they know about their, you know, amazing history. They do, of course they do. But you see the urban thing. So people become urbanized. So when you're living with granny and granddad, when you have access to old family history, you're going to learn it. When you're in an urban setting, I think it slips away. That knowledge that we should all have of where our families came from and how things were, I think there's a danger of it slipping away.
A question for you, Matt, on what you just said. I think what you're referring to is the recent woke ideology. But from what I understand, Americans have always been taught that it's the exceptional nation which has done great things. So I think you might be focusing more on what is the recent, the new George Soros funded stuff, BLM, woke ideology.
Yes, that's what I'm referring to, yeah. So there's a couple of follow-up questions and a new question. So I've got Jerry Harrinder had a follow-up question on the Boer War, and Scott has a question. So Jerry, why don't you ask your question about Sobukwe?
Yes, PD, I'd never heard of Robert Sobukwe before today. That's how uneducated I am. And I'm fascinated by him. And you mentioned a speech he was given, I think in the late 1940s. So it dawned on me, I don't know if you know or not, but did he have contact with other, say, freedom fighters from other parts of the world, say Gandhi, who was in South Africa for a while, or maybe even Mao Zedong in China? I was just wondering if he had other people he was in contact with.
Well, Jerry, it's not just you. I didn't know about him either. So isn't that so sad? I mean, I'd heard of Pan-African Congress, and I'd heard that, you know, there were things may have changed, a great movement for good. You know, it's just in the name, isn't it? And then I remember seeing his face, and his face always stayed with me because there's something so deeply beautiful about his face. And it's only recently that I got these books. So there's only two books. The first one is by Benjamin Pogrund, who was a friend of his. And then the second one is the recent one that's come out, and that's by Tami Kaplaki. He really was the man who started Black consciousness. He formed the ANC Youth League. So he has always been there in these incredibly important roles, but they have managed to kind of drift him out of things because he was such a man of peace, such a man of love. He was a Kennedy of South Africa. Yeah, he would have known people I don't know. I haven't finished the books.
Rising Tide Foundation is really hungry for a review of that book, PD. So whenever you're ready for that, we'll happily publish that in a split second.
Great, thanks.
Harinder, did you still have your follow-up question on the Boer War, or are you satisfied?
Actually, I think I might withdraw it because it is more recent. It was the turn of the 20th century, whereas the question antedated that. So yeah, I'll withdraw the question.
Right. Scott.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I have to say, first off, I'm just blown away Thank you so much for your presentation. It is so sorely needed for education of the Westerners. We give a lot of service to Black Lives Matter, but we don't. It's a lot of it's all virtue signaling by the Western elite, and we eat it all up. I wanted to raise the point of I heard recently on the CBC, our propaganda state organ, about the story of the Kenyan. What are they called? I want to say boxers, but the rebellion that was in Kenya. Pardon me?
Mau Mau's?
Yes, the Mau Mau's. Thank you. Thank you. Yes, so the Mau Mau, they brought up the story of the Mau Mau's and the just unbelievable story of how the evidence showed that there was complete oppression by the British and massacres and the like, and all this documentation of it. And it was stored in Britain, and they've tracked it down, they found it. And the government still finally admitted through, discovery that, yes, they have the information, but we'll piecemeal it out to you over the next 70, 100 years, whatever it is, ridiculous. And we'll have our censors overlook it, redact it, and then hand it over to you. This is completely unacceptable to any modern Western values, so-called world. It was very curious that they covered this. They kind of want to get out in front of this story. The Mau Mau, rebellion people are like, ancient. They're old now. They're like near death. But this was, I think in the 90s where they did this. Remarkable story. I think that's just to, do you know, so I guess my question is, do you know about that story? I guess you might. And is there any, something to add on that? This is a human rights story and kind of the, a show of the of empire, of just like it's empire right in our face. And why do we accept this? The other question is, number two, is there's a great movie called K 2019 that supposes that the pyramids were built by a black race, probably Nubian, related. We do know there were black pharaohs. It proposes a great, based on the work of a Daviditz, French engineer, that the stone is cast, that they developed a whole system to build the pyramids with casting stones. And this is the basis of the Masons, secret of their building. Very, very fascinating. If you haven't seen it, you might very well enjoy it. It's a groundbreaking hypothesis that the blacks, this black sophisticated culture, then built the megaliths around the world, not just in Africa, but around the world, and why we see the Negroid statues in Central America, for example, in the Olmec, and what the connection is there. What was the other thing? Thirdly, we've heard from a friend who's Sudanese that many, many artifacts of the Egyptian culture are actually in Sudan. There are many more of them in Sudan than there is even in Egypt. And I was alarmed to hear that. So if you have any comment about that. Oh, the last thing.
No, wait, Scott. These are three really big concepts. Let's let Katie unravel that. And if you could circle back and ask that last one.
Okay. Oh, great. Thanks so much. There's such interesting questions, and I'm scribbling as fast as I can so I can do my best to answer them. To your first one, the Mau Mau uprisings, the whole liberation episode has been clinically erased. There's very, very little material out there. That doesn't mean it's not known about. You see, this isn't that long ago. All this is still held in living human memory. passed down. It's passed down. There's so much which will come out. You know, poverty is a huge hindrance. And if you realize how few printing houses there are on the entire continent, this will be resolved in time. What happened in Kenya was horrific, and I just put there on the chat, Masingi Africa. It's a fantastic journal. I know the people who run it. They run it out of Kenya, and they have recently published a great article on Kenya's that part of Kenya's history, Kenyan's history. There's something in there you can look up on it. And there's another website which I regularly enjoy called Afro Legends, and that is done by someone in Cameroon. They have great stuff on there on African history. But remember that many things are held in family memory. So all is not lost, hey, just because it's not in a book. But a humorous, or is it funny, but dark humor. Belgium recently, or was it Britain, returned the tooth of Patrice Lumumba. It was Belgium. So they gave the nation back the tooth of their most beloved leader, who they assassinated. The CIA, Belgium, assassinated in 1960. 60, I can't remember, 61, Patrice Lumumba, absolutely phenomenal man, the most loved man by the Congolese nation. And they apparently dissolved his body in acid, but there was a tooth remaining. And they've had the grace and goodwill to return the tooth just lately. You know, what can you say to that? I don't know. The question of the Olmecs. Oh man, is that a fascinating subject? I know what you're talking about. So Dr. Ben, and please tell me his surname, otherwise I have to just go and get the book. Do you know who I'm talking about when I say Dr. Ben? Okay, then you just have to bear with me now. I'll get the book. But the
Dr. Ben,
hey,
Dr. Ben Yakinen.
is it Dr. Ben? Who?
It's Dr. Ben Yakinen. Some people call him Dr. Ben for short.
Okay, because he is amazing. He was totally amazing. He's late now, and I have his books, and some of them. So the most fascinating thing, yes, that the Olmecs, it is incredibly obvious that they were of African origin. But what I find most fascinating is Dr. Ben's book on the African origins of European religions. So we're going to Freemasonry, and how this was an African religion, and of course the pharaohs coming from Kempt, and people say this was the Great Lakes, the Rwenzori Mountains. So this really does fire my mind, and I think there is so much more to be learned there. Most definitely, there's so much that has been hidden, that has been obscured, because Africa has had an incredibly large role in the past, I believe, and will have again in the future. So as to your question on Sudan, Moreau, the pointy pyramids, and of course this was all the same empire, wasn't it? So Nubia, Libya, can't think of the old name for Libya, beginning with a P. And who were the pharaohs? Well, that was a long period of history, and most certainly there were Egyptians. There were also people from other places who were pharaohs of the Egyptian empire. And what exactly was the Egyptian empire and the Egyptian religion and its entire role? And by the way, have you read the Kebra Nagast? So that's the Ethiopian version of the Bible. That's really interesting. Because remember, Ethiopia, the oldest Christian state in the world, very, very important role in history at that time, in the biblical times. So that's about all I can think of saying.
Is the Ethiopian, I'm going to look into this, is the Ethiopian version of the Bible, this is like a different from the Nicene, post-Nicene Creed version established in the 4th century? This is like a different selection of books from the New and Old Testament, or what is this?
It's the story of Solomon.
It's the Old Testament story.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, Kebra Nagast.
It's like the Jewish Bible.
I guess.
Okay.
Yeah. But that Dr. Ben's book, if you just bear with me when you're talking next, Matt, I'll just go and get that book.
No rush.
But
I mean,
it's
there's actually somebody, Harinder posted a link, I believe, to probably that book, African Origins of Major Western Religions. Is that the one?
yes,
Yosef
very,
Ben
very,
Yohanan?
yeah, Ben Yohanan, yeah, very, very interesting. Yeah.
We'll be buying that right now.
Yeah.
Cool. I don't know. Oh, Bill. I almost missed Bill there. Okay. So let's wrap it up with one last question from Bill, who's been waiting for a while. Bill, go for it. Bill, your audio is wacky. Bill, is there any way to mess with your audio a little bit? Because it's scrambled eggs. Is it just me hearing Bill funny, or
No,
It's all
not
Bill
right.
funny too, right? Okay.
Yeah.
Bill, you wrote down your question, so I'm going to read aloud your question. Okay, Bill? Okay, no problem. I think that was a thank you. Okay. 2 questions okay, so number 1, how fragile is South Africa in front of the global systemic economic collapse? Number 2, how dense is the governance, regulatory infrastructure, the ability to respond, move fast to shore up the electricity issue?
I missed the very first part. Was that about South Africa?
Bill asks, number 1, how fragile is South Africa in the face of the global systemic economic collapse? And the second one, how dense is the governance, regulatory infrastructure, that is the ability to respond and move fast to shore up the electricity issue, I guess, provide for the electricity needs in a quick way for South Africans?
To answer that, they are dealing with it, but they have these power cuts which last a long time, and they're hugely damaging. Just for instance, if you're a farmer and you need to irrigate your crops and you use those irrigation things on wheels, unless you have a solar powered system, you're not going to be able to irrigate your crops. You can't run a mill, so you can't grind corn or wheat. That's what you need the electricity for. Kids can't study, crime goes crazy, and foreign investment runs a mile. And that was the whole idea all along. But it is being dealt with thanks to the likes of Minister Gwede Mantashe, thanks to his stance on South Africa burning coal. They're fixing coal plants. I have an interesting written interview on my website, which you can access, and it is called Stop Using Eskom as a Political Football. And that's an interview with Noxum Msebenzi, who is the head of the Nuclear Industry Association of South Africa, and his thoughts on Eskom and the energy crisis. He has some very, very interesting things he says in that interview. That's worth reading. In terms of the economic crash coming down the road, I think this is when everyone in Africa is going to turn to BRICS. This is going to be I don't know the physical, what actually happens when the dollar crashes, as it will do, because like Congo, they use dollars. And many countries are using dollars. I don't know what's going to happen. South Africa obviously is on the rand. Yeah, I think this will be the crunch point when people say, right, new system required. And hopefully they will have tuned into the Rising Tide Foundation and Matthew Ehret and Cynthia Chung and Canadian Patriot Press, and they will be better educated on what to do.
People are paying attention. Definitely things are going to move fast, that's for sure. And it's hard to talk about these sorts of things, since humanity hasn't really ever experienced this type of grand systemic breakdown, and we've never had a coalition of civilizational states working together on principles of natural law that are providing an alternative. It's all new. It's a lot of common principles of history, but expressed in a very, very new and unique way. So this is this is going to be a learning experience, a fast learning curve for a lot of people. That's for sure. Well, you gave us a lot to think about and a lot of wonderful research to do. I mean, I'm really looking forward to picking up these books and cracking through it and making some discoveries. And also, I'm just looking forward to your next class. These are always just such, I was going to say crowd pleasers, but it is. They are crowd pleasers, but they're just the most strategically important lessons that people need to really internalize. And it really it helps people break free a little bit from the filters we're used to looking at the world from our own experience, and our own Western prejudices and assumptions, and we look at the entire world, the past, the future from that lens, and just looking at the history of Africa, our own complicity in allowing for the type of dark age conditions unnecessarily to be imposed upon that entire continent, and the bright future that's being brought online right now by people who think very differently from Eurasia. It really helps break the mind free, right, of a lot of misinformation that we have to navigate through. So I very much appreciate this. I think we all do greatly. So thank you for taking the time, and thank you everyone for taking the Sunday with us.